Welcome, this is Wild Child with United Anarchy, and today we're going to walk through Heroic Korag and Heimal. For this fight, we brought 2 tanks, 5 heals, 6 melee, and 8 ranged. At the beginning of the fight, we assigned 4 healers to the markers in the room so that they can cover the entire room with heals. All range spread out around the circle, careful not to be inside the dark circle, unless told to do so during the nullification barrier, which we'll explain a little bit later. Korag always starts the fight by casting Expel Magic Fire, so DPS need to spread out about 5 yards. The spell is a fire dot that damages all players and has an additional high damage AoE within 5 yards when it expires. So anytime it's cast, your players have about 10 seconds to get 5 yards apart. Korag is also going to target a random ranged player with Suppression Field. That means he's going to charge towards the player and slam the ground for an 8-yard arcane damage. As soon as the player is targeted, they can run out of the area to avoid any damage. That Suppression Field's going to damage and silence anyone who stands in it, so all ranged need to make sure that they're not dropping this in the middle of the room or in that dark circle in the middle, and make sure that they're not standing in it. Korag starts the fight with a nullification barrier. As he's taking damage, the barrier is going to break, and once it breaks, Korag's going to run to the center of the room like he's doing right now, and recharge his barrier. At this point, 2 very important things need to happen. The first priority is that everybody needs to get out of the middle of the room except for 1 ranged DPS, who's going to step into the barrier with Korag and get Caustic Energy. Caustic Energy reduces the amount of healing that the player is going to receive and damages them every second. The damage can't be reduced or avoided through any immunities, so if the player survives the entire channel, they get a nullification barrier themselves that's going to protect them for up to 15 million damage. They're going to need this barrier in order to mitigate overflowing energy orbs for the raid, and we'll talk more about the orbs in a moment. It's very important that you assign at least 4 or 5 of your ranged DPS to soak the caustic energy and gain that nullification barrier. Only 1 player can get into the barrier at a time, so again, you have to make sure that everybody is out of the middle when he runs to the middle of the room, so that the right person is gaining the buff. Because the player is going to be taking an enormous amount of damage during that phase, we also had to assign 1 healer to watch that person and make sure that they were staying alive throughout the entire channel. The second concern during the channel phase is the ads. So here he is channeling again, and you'll see that there are volatile anomalies appearing in waves every 8 seconds during this phase. You're going to get about 9 total. These ads have to be gathered up by the tank and moved into the suppression field before they die. So that means that we had to assign 2 healers to watch the tank during this phase, because the tank was picking up all 9 ads, but also standing in the suppression field to make sure that we were not taking additional damage as the ads were dying. So tanks, make sure that you're watching where the last suppression field was dropped so that you can move the ads to the correct place. We had issues before where the field will disappear underneath the ads as they're dying, and that will definitely cause a wipe. Once a ranged DPS has a nullification barrier, they need to start looking up at the ceiling to see where the overflowing energy orbs are spawning. These are orange balls of light that are going to be dropping from the ceiling to the ground. The easiest way to identify where they're in the room is to look up, although they will also have a yellow swirl on the ground to signify where they're going to be landing. The DPS with the nullification barrier should stand in the swirls and soak the damage from the orb as it falls. If no one soaks the damage, it's going to explode and do a high amount of arcane damage to the entire raid. When you have multiple DPS soaking the orbs, you're going to have to be very vocal about which orb who is covering, and we use world markers around the room to help identify which side of the room an orb was spawning, and people could call it out. As usual, Korag forces a tank swap during the fight. He is going to cast Expel Magic Arcane on the current tank. This forces a tank to swap and run away from the middle as quickly as possible. Since the raid is spread out, it's important that the raid pay attention to where the tanks are and get out of the way when a tank starts to run. They're going to be doing massive amount of damage to anyone within 5 yards of where they're standing as they're running through. So if you see the tank running and pulsing like a purple-blue, get out of the way, or else you will die. There's only 2 other abilities you have to deal with during the fight. Expel Magic Shadow is a debuff that Korag casts on all the raid members. It prevents up to 50,000 healing received from actually reaching the target. So that means that every person in the raid has to be healed for 50,000 before they can actually receive any healing. We assigned a healing cooldown rotation to deal with this mechanic. It's very important that every healer is able to track this debuff so they can prioritize targets. When casting the cooldown, healers need to move towards the middle of the room to ensure they're reaching the maximum amount of players. The last ability to worry about is Expel Magic Frost. So Korag will cast a large frost orb in a random portion of the room. All ranged need to get away from the orb quickly. Healers need to be prepared for a large amount of damage that the range is going to be taking until they move away from the orb. So just to sum it up, watch out for running tanks, grab a nullification barrier, soak overflowing orbs, heal through shadow, get away from the pulsing frost orb, don't stand in the suppression fields, and kill the ads in the fields. I think that means a win.